As the Edmonton Oilers navigate the preseason, training camp, and getting ready for the upcoming year, there's a simple question. Is Travis Dermott going to be a part of this upcoming NHL season?
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, where now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, I've been teasing this topic for a week and a half, and I haven't found the right day to do it for whatever reason, because other more topical conversation ideas have come up. But we're going to spend the next 27 minutes or so talking about Oilers PTO signing Travis Dermott, who has been in the NHL for a handful of seasons now, who has enough of a statistical profile, enough NHL experience to kind of put him in a specific box, to understand who he is, what he brings, if he's a realistic candidate to make the team, what kind of role he could conceivably have if he makes the team. So at the outset, let's be clear about this. We talked about it a few weeks ago when we were talking about guys like Tyson Barrie and Kevin Shattenkirk. You are on a PTO because you need to prove you have something left. The PTO is a useful tool for player and team alike. Even if Dermott doesn't ultimately end up signing with the Oilers, if another team that's out there that's doing pro scouting sees a good preseason and training camp out of Dermott with Edmonton, they would be able to offer the veteran defenseman and extend a contract, a full contract. To remember, PTO is not a guaranteed contract. It is effectively a training camp invite, like in football or in baseball, where you get a spring training invite, which may or may not get you on the team, but it at least gets your foot in the door. So I think the first thing to understand is that somebody like Dermott, with his path, who drafted him, where he was drafted, he is somebody who is going to get looks. And a lot of his inability to really stick over the years, whether in Toronto, in Vancouver, or this past year in Arizona, now Utah, is the simple fact that he's had a hard time staying healthy. He's only played over 50 games in an NHL season 4 times. But when you have the aura, you have the name recognition of being a second-round pick, especially at the top of the second round, 34th overall, of the Toronto Maple Leafs, a Kyle Dubas draft pick, somebody who has, for whatever reason, and I don't want to turn this into a Kyle Dubas referendum because he's got a complicated track record as far as drafting, as far as player evaluation, but people within hockey value Kyle Dubas's opinion. So if teams see that this guy was a former Leaf draft pick when Kyle was the GM, that tells people that there might be something still there. We talk about this a lot with former first-round picks. It's true of second-round picks of certain players in certain types of organizations. If you have that name recognition, if you have a high pedigree where you played really well in junior hockey or in Europe in a men's league or in college hockey, you are going to get more opportunities than players who have a little bit less to go on for whatever reason, whether it's you flashed something earlier in your career, whether you've developed the right connections, your agent has developed the right connections. Sometimes all it takes is a training camp invite. I'll cite the example of Tony Jefferson, who's an NFL player who sat out the entirety of last year, but this year, this football season that started 2 weeks ago, NFL season, he got a training camp invite and he played his way onto a 53-man roster. So sometimes it really is just a matter of opportunity. And for someone like Dermott, who hasn't stayed healthy, who doesn't have an incredible track record of stats, I should say, who doesn't have a great analytical profile, who hasn't really been able to stay healthy for a while, even get significant opportunities on lower quality teams, he's somebody that, because of where he was drafted and by whom, he's afforded opportunities. Whether or not you feel that Travis Dermott is even worthy of this PTO, that's a different conversation. But we talked about this last week. The Oilers are in a position where they have a lot up in the air, especially on that back end. Right now, we are assuming Darnell Nurse will not start the preseason on time. He may or may not end up getting to get in some preseason games to start working himself back up to game speed. Regardless of whether or not Darnell Nurse starts the preseason on time, you still need to successfully assimilate Troy Stetcher and Ty Emberson, or maybe Joshua Brown, or maybe in this case, Travis Dermott. So looking at Dermott's profile, as I said, he was a 34th overall pick way back in 2015. So sitting here in 2019, we are talking about a 27-year-old who has 330 career NHL games and almost 10 NHL eligible years of being in the NHL. He spent 3 years in the AHL with the Toronto Marlies, the Leafs AHL affiliate, before getting his first real serious look at the NHL level. And we know the Leafs have had a hard time successfully integrating, assimilating their younger players. They keep them in the AHL maybe a smidge longer than they probably should because they don't feel they have the opportunity to give those young guys opportunities because they're so in the thick of it. You know, we talk about this in regards to the Oilers, that they're not necessarily inclined to give somebody like Matthew Savoie a lot of leeway, even in the preseason, to make the team, because there isn't room for error when the expectations are this high. And that's the case in Toronto as well. That is an organizational philosophy. Some teams, as Oiler fans, Ken Holland very famously kept guys in the AHL, maybe even longer than they necessarily needed to be, or too long, frankly, because he wanted them as NHL ready as possible. So after 5 NHL seasons with the Toronto Maple Leafs, he was traded to the Vancouver Canucks for a 3rd-round pick in 2022. He spent 2 seasons with the Canucks, did not play a lot of games because he could not stay healthy. And this past season, he played about 50 games for the Arizona Coyotes, the now Utah hockey team. Only 121 NHL games played over the last 3 NHL seasons. As I said before, only 4 seasons of more than 50 NHL games. The injury history is rough. When you are at 27 years old and you only have 300 NHL games played, that's a real question mark, especially when you're with organizations like Vancouver and like Arizona that have needed defensemen, frankly. You look, Arizona has turned over half of their defense in one offseason, and incorporating Ian Cole, Mikhail Sergachev, and John Marino. They are looking for guys. And the Canucks, the Canucks have been a dumpster fire of defensemen for the better part of the last decade. Now, they've started to solidify what that identity, what that vision is around Quinn Hughes, with Roenick, with Tyler Myers, with Derek Forbort, with Carson Soucy, and Vinny Desharnais. They have found what their identity is on the back end. And that was a team that desperately needed quality left-handed defensemen to slide in behind Quinn Hughes. But Dermott was not able to seize the opportunity afforded to him. And now we sit here. He's 27 years old. So last year with Arizona, 17 minutes per game of average time on ice. In terms of overall ice time, there were 6 defensemen who played more minutes on the Coyotes last year than Dermott did. One of them, Matt Dumba, was actually Dermott's most common defensive partner, but Dumba was traded to the Tampa Bay Lightning during the course of last season at the trade deadline and still finished 7th in time on ice. And we're going to talk about his underlying results in the next segment, but I do want to clarify, he wasn't exactly playing with world beaters. His most common defensive partners last year were Matt Dumba, who's very clearly on the back nine of his NHL career, and Josh Brown, somebody who's a fringe NHLer at best, on a not very good Coyotes team. So I do want to clarify that we're going to talk about his underlying results in the next segment, but I'm not entirely ready to write him off because of the teams he's been on and the partners he's played with. But we will talk about that in the next segment. So be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account, current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Last week in the NFL, very interesting. You saw the Packers with Malik Willis pull one out against Anthony Richardson. The Texans looked pretty good on Sunday Night Football against the Bears. Last night, the Eagles blowing a late lead against Atlanta at home. Upcoming on the NFL slate, you've got the Patriots going to the Jets. The Jets 6.5-point home favorites. Can the Jets put the Patriot demons to bed? The Eagles coming off of a tough loss going to New Orleans as 2.5-point road dogs to the best offense in football through 2 weeks, the New Orleans Saints. The other interesting game to me, and this is one that I am very excited for because of the offenses, the Detroit Lions going to the Arizona Cardinals. The Lions, 3-point road favorites in Arizona against Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison Jr. If you are as excited like I am for those games and you want to get in on the action, make the game a little more lively, visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers. A little later in the day than I usually like to post, but was busy, had a few meetings I had to sit in on today. So wasn't able to get it out in the normal morning window, but I'm going to do my best to get one out for you guys Wednesday morning. So it's back into that normal routine. We're back up to 5 days a week of episodes. We're getting ramped up for the NHL season. I'm going to start doing the legwork to set up crossovers, to do previews. We'll talk to other Locked On hosts. We'll talk to content people. I'll do my best to get some people outside of my normal sphere so that I can give you the most full scope approach to how I think about things. When I am trying to evaluate teams, when I'm trying to evaluate players, I like to read and consume as much content as I possibly can about them. That way, if I'm missing anything, I get my eyes open. Because the more information you have access to, the more informed you're going to be, and the more likely you are to form a well-rounded conclusion. That's why whenever we do these player evaluation style episodes, we talk about the context, how long they've been in the league, who they've played with, the results they've gotten in the minutes they've played, their transition stats, their NHL edge stats, how fast do they skate, where on the ice are they most often. Because when you have that full scope approach of a player, that gives you the best understanding you're going to have as to raw talent-wise what they're going to be able to bring to your team. Because as we all know, just because a player is good or bad in one location doesn't necessarily mean the same results are going to translate to wherever they end up. And we've talked about that a lot in regards to the Oilers this offseason. When you have as much roster turnover as they have, especially on that back end where defense is such a feel-based position in hockey, you are going to have that feeling out process where guys need to get an understanding of what the other one wants to do. And it's why having Dermott in on a PTO is interesting just purely from a roster construction standpoint. But I do think this is a good idea. You heard me argue this a few weeks ago that it was a good idea for the Oilers to bring in an extra guy, even if it was just to push whoever the last defenseman was, whether it was Emberson, whether it was Josh Brown, whether it was Troy Stecher. With Stecher coming off of an ankle injury, with Emberson having only 30 games of NHL experience, and Josh Brown not being particularly effective at the NHL level, giving them somebody to push them and honestly push them with a chance of making the team, that's good roster construction. Then that's how you build a competitive room where guys are pushing each other to keep getting better, which should be your end goal at the end of the day as a hockey team. It's not just about managing the personalities. It's about getting the best out of those people. And as professional athletes, you would think pure competition, if that guy's better than you, he's getting the spot. It should bring out the best. So looking at Dermott's underlying numbers, again, I want to qualify all of this by saying he's not playing with great line mates. He's not playing with a great defensive partner. He's not playing on strong defensive teams. The Coyotes last year and the Canucks the years prior are not good defensive teams at all. There's a reason the Canucks have turned over 5 of their 6 defensemen over the last 3 years. There's a reason Arizona turned over 3 of their 6 most common defensemen from last season. He does not profile as a play driver, meaning he himself as an individual is not going to make his partner better. It's not going to make their forwards better. But the qualifier to that, we'll talk about in the next segment, the transition and the edge stats, which give a little bit more of a detailed perspective, but he hasn't been over 50% of scoring chances since he left Toronto. He has a negative goal share over the last 2 seasons. He has a negative expected goal share, a negative high danger goal share. He's below average on ice shooting percentage and below average on ice save percentage. But again, I really want to qualify. When you are a player who is not a play driver, your results, your underlying numbers are almost entirely going to be driven by the environment, by the team you're around. Because we all know that if Travis Dermott was a really good hockey player, he would have stuck in Arizona, he would have stuck in Vancouver. The Leafs wouldn't have traded him to begin with, but he is a fringe NHL player, which teams need. Every team needs guys. You will go through 10, 11, 12 defensemen over the course of an entire NHL season. You will probably go through close to 20 forwards over the course of an entire NHL season. And having as many guys as you possibly can who are ready to go to take an open spot should one arise is just good organizational management. And we'll talk about the organizational management perspective of this in the third segment as well, as to whether or not we think he's actually going to make the team, what type of contract, all that. We'll talk about that in the final segment on the way out. But the underlying results, the one that is encouraging, and you got to stay with me because this is complicated. So even though we just said he had a negative expected goal share, that means in terms of overall expected goals. So expected goals are calculated by assigning each scoring chance, so a shot on goal, anytime a puck goes on net, that shot has an associated value based on historical data from how often shots from that location have gone in. Because when Dermott was on the ice, whether with Dumba, whether with Josh Brown, the other team's scoring chances had more expected goals value than the chances that Dermott, his partner, and his line mates were able to generate in the same amount of ice time. But the one caveat to that is when we do it on a rate level, which means per 60 minutes, he's a little bit above average defensively in terms of his isolated impact. And that's from hockeyviz.com, which does a really nice job of distilling out value on an individual player basis. But that is encouraging slightly because he has not played on great defensive teams, even back when on the Leafs, even where he had positive possession numbers on the Leafs are not a great defensive team. There is a reason that they, like the Canucks, like the Coyotes, like a number of teams across the league, have consistently been rotating guys in and out, trying to find the right mix of six defensemen because it's hard to do. And because Dermott has the Leaf pedigree, he has some interesting underlying numbers and, frankly, good transition habits. I can see what the Oilers think they see. There is no way to know whether or not this is going to work until we actually start playing preseason games and start going through training camp. But at the very least, there is a plan here. There is a vision. Now, process being good does not necessarily mean good results. But if you have good process repeatedly over and over again, eventually you are going to get rewarded with good results. So we're going to take one more quick break. We'll come back. We'll talk about the edge stats. We'll talk about the transition stats. Then we'll give a final assessment whether or not we think Travis Dermott is a serious candidate to make this team on this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. So be sure to stick around. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers. So PTO guys have a lot of opportunity in front of them and not a lot of time. You know, most NHL teams are not playing a huge slate of preseason games. A lot of the teams in the NHL now are frankly playing split squad preseason games so they can get as many guys, as much NHL ice time as possible to get honest evaluations. Because there are a lot of teams out there that are auditioning like 6 guys for 2 spots. And because of that, they want to get these guys as much game time as possible. So with that in mind, and Dermott has been in Edmonton, he participated in a captain's skate the other day, which that's not even officially an Oilers activity. That's a McDavid organized activity. So don't be worried if someone you're worried about being on the team is not at a captain's skate. They are not mandatory reports, but I digress. Talking about transition stats, this is where I find the most value exists in players, because these individual aspects of a game, when we're talking about puck recoveries, puck retrievals, zone exits, zone denials, those are such granular and small aspects of the game that there is an opportunity there for things to slip through the cracks. So good things about Dermott's transition stats, and this is with Arizona, not a great possession team. low rate of failed exits and turnovers, meaning that when the puck is in the Coyotes zone, Dermott does a good job of not turning the puck over. The caveat to that is he did not individually himself go back and retrieve a lot of pucks. He has a low rate of clears and a low rate of exits with possession of the puck. Those are below average rates. So when you think about possession, think about it in terms of the puck goes behind the Oilers' net, defenseman gets the puck, moves the puck to their partner or the first forward on the outlet pass to try and get going in transition. That's what we're talking about here. Something else that's encouraging, an above average rate of entry denials, and other teams don't skate at Dermott through the neutral zone when they are trying to gain the zone. So we got to think about that in terms of partner. If the choice is going at Dermott or Matt Dumba, teams chose to go at Matt Dumba, and same thing with Joshua Brown. That tells me that teams at the very least respect his reach, respect his ability to get in the position he needs to be in on the ice to deny the other team possession, or at least deny them entry of the offensive zone. So with that in mind, the thing that surprised me when I looked at the NHL Edge stats, which if you're not familiar, and I do cite them from time to time. So in every NHL player, they wear shoulder pads underneath their jerseys. In those shoulder pads is a little chip. That chip tracks how fast a player goes, where on the ice they are, how far they go. It tracks a whole bunch of individual data, and it's a very useful tool for player evaluation. So Dermott is below 50% in all of the skating metrics, whether it's top speed, average top speed, distance covered, offensive zone time. That tells me that Dermott is a muck it up, low event hockey player. You've heard me use that phraseology to talk about bottom six forwards a lot. The idea that as long as they're not conceding defensively, it doesn't really matter a whole lot if they're creating offensive chances. But in terms of a sixth or seventh defenseman, somebody who is very clearly trying to play their way onto a team or an NHL opportunity, you want to think about it in terms of how do we go from point A to point B? I think there is a path for Dermott to be on the Oilers this year. I do think there is a world where if Nurse isn't going to start the season on time or isn't going to play close to a full slate of preseason games and needs to ramp himself up, Emberson, Stetcher, Joshua Brown, that's three of your six guys, who have real question marks next to them. And then Dermott presents the opportunity, or I should say he presents an insurance policy. If the Oilers need to play Travis Dermott 60 games this year, something has not gone right. Travis Dermott at 27 years old, I don't think is an NHL regular on a good team. On a bad team, he could play. On the Blackhawks, on the Sharks, on the Ducks, I think there would be no question about Dermott playing close to his full slate of possible if he was healthy. On a good team like the Oilers, the Bruins, the Rangers, the Hurricanes, the Devils, the Panthers, I think Dermott very obviously fits as a sixth or seventh defenseman, meaning that if you have an injury, he's your first guy in because he has NHL experience. He's not going to do anything too flashy, so he's not going to stress you out. He's not going to give you agita as a coach. He's going to play low event hockey. He's going to get the puck from point A to point B. He's not freelancing in the offensive zone. He is going to be extremely conservative. He's going to be risk averse. And that is what NHL coaches want from that third defensive pair, especially from players like Dermott who don't have that offensive aspect to their game. Of course, in an ideal world, you want 6-7 Bouchards because you're going to be moving the puck really well. But because of the nature of the salary cap era of the NHL, because of the nature of talent evaluators and general managers, you are never going to see a team lean entirely into that mindset of building a defense that way because they value size, they value physicality, they value the ability to win puck battles. So with that in mind, the idea of bringing someone who has a strong pedigree, being a reasonably high draft pick, who's played for a few different teams, who just needs a chance, there's a real recipe here for Dermott to play himself onto the team. And I say that because, and someone brought this up, I don't remember who I saw say this. I don't remember if I read it in an article or if I saw it on Twitter, but somebody said the Oilers have 6 or 7 defensemen on one-way contracts, meaning they can't go down to the AHL without clearing waivers. Dermott, being that he doesn't have a contract yet, is a candidate for a 2-way contract, meaning they could send him up, send him down. They could send him up or send him down and put themselves in a position where they're not going to need to put him on waivers. Some of their other defensemen, like Joshua Brown, are not in that same position. And because of that, it's going to create a little bit more of a squeeze on the roster. I am not saying one way or another whether or not Dermott should make the team, but I do think there's a strong argument that Dermott is better than Joshua Brown. And if that's a real consideration to consider here, I think you got to give the guy a fair shot. If Dermott shows you he's healthy and he's able to play and play better than the guys you currently have, I think that alone as a competitive person running a hockey team should move you. You know, if Dermott shows you he's got something here, put him in a position, let's see what he's got. And if he makes the team, great, you solve the problem. If not, you're going to have to baby that defensive core, I should say, along for first 50 games until you can get to March when the trade deadline pops up and you can start making a move, whether it's for a William Borgen, if it's for a Jacob Chikrin, whoever you like as a pending unrestricted free agent defenseman. That's the mindset you need to have right now if you're the Oilers, if you're Stan Bowman. You need to find one more defenseman, whether that's Joshua Brown, whether that's somebody in the organization who only has AHL experience. You need at least one more guy you can go to at some point this season. The Oilers are going to go through 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, even maybe 15 defensemen over the course of an entire season because injuries happen. Defensemen there is a lot of contact when you play defensemen in the NHL, just on retrievals, just on blocking shots. That wear and tear accumulates, even if it's only for a game or two. The Oilers are going to need guys, and this is somebody who has interesting underlying results, especially in terms of transition, which should, at least in theory, mean on a good team where he's only going to have to get the puck to better players, he's not going to have to do a whole lot, which would put him in a position to succeed. So I think Dermott probably ends up making the team on a two-way contract. That way he can be sent to the AHL, and the Oilers aren't in a position where they would need to waive somebody if they have a roster issue. The money is going to be a bit dicey because the Oilers only have 900-something thousand in salary cap space at this exact moment, so it might need to be pretty close to that veteran minimum, whatever it is for a player of Dermott's stature. I want to say this before we get out of here. There was an NBA player. I don't know if Doug McDermott's still in the NBA, but it has taken every fiber of my being this entire episode to not refer to Travis Dermott as McDermott, as in terms of Doug McDermott, the basketball player, because God, I honestly forgot a little bit about Doug McDermott until Travis Dermott made the team. But enough of that aside, I want to thank everyone who listened to today's episode. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please give the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell so you get a notification whenever new content goes live. Leave me a comment. Do you think Travis Dermott makes the team? Do you think he's a two-way guy? Do you think he forces the Oilers to have a difficult conversation about somebody above him in the pecking order like Josh Brown? Let me know in the comments. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. But before we get out of here, thank you for making Locked On Oilers your first listen today. Now for your second listen, go find Locked On NHL, where local experts keep you updated daily on all the biggest storylines ahead of the season. Find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.